Hello, everyone. This is Jamie Flinchbaugh, host of People Solve Problems, and today we have as a guest Greg Jacobson. Greg, how you doing today?
I'm great. Looking forward to our conversation.
Yes. Well, I should start by calling you Dr. Greg Jacobson. Yeah, not just as a background, but medical doctor. But here, really today, sort of as the co-founder and CEO of KaiNexus, which is how I really know you. And we could talk a bit about KaiNexus, but my very, very brief explanation is KaiNexus is software to help people with continuous improvement. That's about as short as I can make it. But most people that co-found a software as a service business are usually about sort of automating and taking waste out of work that has to be done, kind of an automation process. But that's not necessarily kind of the inspiration behind KaiNexus. But maybe we can just start there. Really, what inspired the start of KaiNexus, and along the way, you can also fill in a better description of what KaiNexus does.
Okay. Yeah, that sounds great. No, one, I think your description was really good. You hinted a little bit about the origin. So, I'm an emergency medicine doctor, and I was introduced to all the principles of Lean and Kaizen in '04 when my chairman handed me Masaaki Imai's book Kaizen. And he said, "You think like this. I think we can teach this to our residents as a way to meet one of the residency competencies that the accreditation body, the ACGME, had just put on residencies in the early aughts." And I'll tell you, Jimmy, by page 7, I was blown away because I was like, "Wow, there is an entire discipline all about improving systems. This is crazy." Um, Healthcare is so broken that we could just apply these principles in the emergency department and just solving problems. There's so many low-hanging fruit that we could just run with. And so that was the idea of the concept of the ER doctor, the ER nurse, the tech, the people at the front lines. We know what the problems are. The administration may have the power to fix them, but they don't know what the problems are. And
Right.
so, what if we started asking for these these ideas, these problems, these issues? And fortunately, it was in an environment where a couple things existed that kind of fostered this. And one, we talked a little bit before we hit the record button, but if you're at an organization where you don't feel safe bringing up problems and issues, it just kind of gets stopped right at the tracks.
Mhm.
And so it was such a great introduction to me to what does psychological safety mean at an organization without even knowing the term psychological safety. I don't even know when the term was coined, but maybe it was even after that time. So
Yeah, so that's I mean that's fascinating. I'll come back to the being a doctor and discovering the book KaiNexus, which was an early read
Kaizen.
for many of us in the field. But let's talk about psychological safety. I mean, I used to talk about it just around professional safety, emotional safety, physical safety, and so yeah, I think the term psychological safety came along later. But what is that? It has formal definitions, but as someone who experienced it as a barrier to improvement, how do you define it and how is it best resolved?
Yeah, to me, I think the way I define it, Mark Rabin is the one that kind of formally introduced me to the concept, and I think I'm probably going to mess up the definition that he shares and who he shares it from, but it's something to the effect of being rewarded for being vulnerable. And so it is a very vulnerable situation when someone says, "Hey, I think this thing is broken," or "Hey, I don't know the answer to this," or "Hey, where do I go get help?" And hey, I actually disagree with what you're saying, and I think this is the right answer. So there's lots of different levels of psychological safety. Of one, feeling like you're included, and then all the way to where you actually feel like you can challenge the system. And so I think the yeah, the definition I would say is how I that's how I think through the definition of psychological safety. What's interesting is, so we mentioned I'm an emergency medicine doctor. I finished my time at Vanderbilt, and for a couple years, my wife and I did a lot of traveling assignments. It's called locum tenens in medicine, and so we worked in probably eight or so medical centers throughout the U.S., and we even did a stint in New Zealand.
Mm.
And to see different emergency departments where you could really feel psychologically safe to raise your hand versus places where it was, just keep your mouth shut and just get the job done. It's palpable, and there's no question that the places where people are encouraged to speak up and to improve, they just have better outcomes in general, from an anecdotal as well as a data standpoint. So
Yeah. So I want to just probe a little bit, not to make this an advertisement about KaiNexus, but the role of a system in that. And I'll just share some of my perspective, and then see if you have stories, anecdotes, or perspectives on that. But I think looking someone in the eye and telling them there's a problem requires a lot of psychological safety.
yep.
But if all I have to do is log the issue, now I'm not complaining to you, so to speak. We're on the same side of the screen, looking at the issue logged on a screen, and it's the issue. It's not me. It's not you. It's the issue. The issue is what is our common enemy, is our common foe, so to speak, that we've logged on a system. So to me, that's a little bit of the role a system can play in helping move along psychological safety. But what's been your experience about how those two things fit together?
It's interesting. I actually hadn't thought about the psychological aspect of when you have a system, especially an electronic system that's in people's pockets or at their workstation or on a wall, board monitor situation. There is an element of slight disconnection from the personalization and the potential kind of negative emotion that could be created when someone says something to you verbally. And so it does kind of galvanize a situation where it's like, oh yes, this is becoming about efficiency or about patient satisfaction or customer satisfaction. And so what we typically see, and just to give context, so initially when KaiNexus was founded, we were really just a bottom up idea suggestion system that was built with Kaizen principles. And now we are really an operational excellence platform that's helping organizations with all the different workflows that are included with that type of work. Specifically, how do you develop a culture of continuous improvement? So whether it's project management workflows or issues in ideation or strategy deployment, we even have organizations that are doing incidents. And so the Mayo Clinic uses us to do their mortality review. Whenever someone dies in the system, there's an entire process that they do. They analyze it to see, is there something we can learn from it? And it creates a situation where at the end of that process, opportunities for improvement come out. And it's really this shift from, we're not looking to blame someone for a death. I mean, people that are sick go to hospitals. That's an outcome of life. But what could we possibly learn from the situation to see if we could have made the experience more comfortable? We could have made the experience have a different outcome. Or did we learn anything else in the process? And so we definitely see a huge benefit in having that. And I would say what it does is, a lot of people are afraid, oh, if it's in an electronic system, it's going to decrease the amount of human interaction people have about it. And what we end up finding is the exact opposite happens. When it's what's in there, it's creating visibility to a lot of people that wouldn't have had that visibility. But it also fosters communication. Oh, Jamie, you put an idea in yesterday on the line where you're doing something with a water meter. You have some part and you made an observation. And so now I'm all of a sudden engaging with you in that situation. And it helps kind of foster that. So it's been interesting to see how this medium is kind of transforming and leveraging and helping to accentuate connectedness.
Right. No, I like that a lot. So let me go back to the idea of your medical training and how it intersects with this discipline of improvement. You mentioned when somebody handed you the book Kaizen
Yeah.
that, oh, you think like this, which kind of implies not everybody does in your profession. So what is it about the medical training that either is an impediment to sort of good systemic lean thinking, or what is it about medical training that can enhance or actually feeds into this line of thinking? How does that background help or hinder?
Interesting question. I haven't had that. So I definitely think I'm going to talk about it from the standpoint of how it would help. I think, you know, physicians are trained with the background of science, right? There's this it's not pure science because you're not going to the bench and doing experiments, but in some ways, every patient is a little experiment, right? I mean, you're gathering your evidence, and then you have a hypothesis, and then you're going to run some tests, and then what is the outcome, right? And so the lean folks listening realize, oh, it's almost like a patient encounters an A3, and that's exactly what it is. I mean, you know, you do an H and P, and that's all the left side, and then you come up with your differential and your testing and your countermeasure. That's all the right side. And so I think just in general, that's the underlying framework for a lot of physicians, and in that scientific problem solving it's hard to miss that when you're practicing lean and continuous improvement. The I think the counter to that is a lot of times physicians the inherent nature of the competitiveness to get into medical school and to make it through medical school and to get through residency and maybe do some, you know, fellowships. And if you want to go the academic route, you can, you know, get into an academic kind of situation. The inherent competitiveness and the sometimes the need to maybe be superhuman, I think can really sort of looking filter some distasteful personalities, if you will. And so, and really can foster people make it through more of a fixed mindset. And well, I know the right way to do things. And so that it can create situations where people have a lack of curiosity and a lack of growth mindset. Because you know they have been the alpha dog and they have, you know, gotten all the questions right on the test, and now they, you know, whether they're, you know, kind of insecure deep down and trying to overcome that, or they need to have that kind of command because they are making critical decisions in a very compressed time in high risk situations. So I think that's the part that could hinder you. I don't know if that resonates with you,
Oh
Jamie.
yeah, no, I think it does, and I you know, as someone that's carried, and these aren't the words you use, but I'll use them for myself, carried plenty of arrogance around with him for his achievements. You know, it's easy to just assume that you're in a position to know, as opposed to be humble and curious and growth mindset. There's a quote that always resonated with me from Golda Meir. Says, "Don't be humble. You're not that great," and which is basically a way to say, humility is almost like, well, I have to try to be humble instead of just
Uh-huh.
accept that I'm not that great, which I think is a great way to put it. So yeah, be in a growth mindset, which kind of leads me to a little bit of, whether it's the things like a growth mindset, um, or the diagnosis, or bringing up an issue, or supporting somebody on an issue. This requires a lot of daily habits, of daily practices, of
Mhm.
daily behaviors, um, some of which may run counter to, especially if, I mean, I just put emergency room at a very fast paced, results oriented environment.
Yeah. Yeah.
And that's not the only place where that exists. But how do you either, build those habits, encourage those habits? Where do those habits come from that help enable a Kaizen capability?
Yeah, it's great. I've gotten very interested in habit science, so thank you for setting me up for this, Jamie. But about 8 years ago now, I think I read Duhigg's Power of Habits, and then Clear's Atomic Habits came out a few years later.
Mhm.
And both of those texts, and I kind of topped it off with Fogg's Tiny Habits in all my reading, really transformed my life personally. It helped me kind of decrease the habits that I didn't want to be doing, and it helped me increase the habits that I did want to be doing. And we've always talked at KaiNexus that in order to create a culture of continuous improvement, you need to have kind of three things in that culture. You need to have leadership behaviors, you need to have improvement methodology, and you need to have technology to support those two things. And so I wish I could say, I read Duhigg's book and I immediately realized the applicability of these things to continuous improvement, but it wasn't probably until I read them the second time and it hit me over the head with a hammer kind of thing where I was like, wait a minute, these principles are critical in developing the type of behaviors that one sees at an organization practicing lean. And so then we started to think, well, how could we design a system that would take advantage of these things? And how could we how could we teach these things? Because at the end of the day, we're a technology company, but we're a technology company that I don't really care about the technology within itself. What
Mhm.
I care is the transformation that the technology helps facilitate in an organization, right? Without humans interacting in a very particular way with that technology and in a particular, methodology, solving problems and working through issues or whatever kind of workflow your organization is deemed, there is no value to the technology, and the technology's value is becomes exponential when lots of people are using it in a very particular way. And so we started to have the realization that the concepts of habit science could be applied to different people in a system that was attempting to do this work. And so are you familiar with the habit loop?
Yes.
Yeah. And so just to remind people, the habit loop is either a three-step loop or a four-step loop, depending on what you're reading. But I'm a simple-minded person, so we'll just do it in three steps. But it starts with a cue, and that cue triggers a routine, and that routine, it needs to be followed up with some type of reward. And when those things happen in a particular cycle, it helps accentuate and helps to create that habit. And so it's we almost started to realize, like, what if you could make the routine of one person be the trigger of someone else's habit loop of a different kind of person? And so you could start modeling out an organization into, executives and senior leaders, you know, leaders and middle management, um, the CI coaches,
Mhm.
and frontline. And if you started to think through, well, how do we want CI coaches to interact? Well, they interact very particularly with executives and senior leaders. That could be the trigger. That could be the cue for them to do the leader standard work that you want them to do. And then you could reward them, and you can start to see how all those things interact. And it's really resonated. It's resonated, and I think it's a critical thing because it's not technology like a CRM or an ERP or electronic medical record, because it takes a very particular way of using it and almost mimicking kind of human behavior in an electronic platform for it to really work. So it's been a really interesting journey, and been really rewarding to help people kind of think through how people need to be interacting to help you know foster and engage more people in doing that type of behavior.
Yeah. No, I love that. And to the point of the interconnectedness, like I've often when I'm coaching leaders to be asking more questions, it's not, I tell them it's not about information gathering because that's, you're already probably doing that.
Yeah.
And if you're asking really good questions, you probably don't even care about the answer. You care about the thought process it triggers, right? So the question is the routine for the leader, but it's the cue for the individual or the group
Yeah.
that you're getting them to think about something or think differently about something because of that question you asked. So I like the way you framed the interconnectedness of all that. Um, so I wonder, since you mentioned 3 books, Power of Habits, Clear Habits, Tiny Habits, is
Yep.
there was there a favorite of those 3 for you?
Um, so, so, um, okay, so the 3 books are Power of Habits, Duhigg, Atomic Habits, Clear,
Yeah.
and Tiny Habits, Fog.
Right.
And so the order that I did them in was Duhigg, then Clear, then Fog. But that's, I think, just the order that I encountered them. I would probably say Atomic Habits is where I would start, and then I would go to Duhigg a second, and then Fog. Now, if Fog is listening, then I would definitely start with Fog.
Yeah, I probably should give you a listener list before we start that question. So,
No,
so
but they're all excellent, and in fact, I've done some keynotes on this topic, and did one last week at our user conference, and I've actually included um, crucial influence in that as well. I don't know, it
yes,
in the first edition of that book was called influencers, but influencers means something different now in society, and so they switched it to crucial influence, which I think it overlays into I mean, the thesis of that book is to lead is to influence, and then how do you create systems that can do that, and they overlap and they tie in perfectly together.
yeah, and listeners should know that, as you mentioned, you have you KaiNexus runs its own conference, so you have a chance to listen to Greg speak. Although you will have to wait a little while till next year's conference. So we're out of time, but one last question, because you mentioned you started reading these books and changing your own habits. So what's a favorite habit of your own that you've created as this whole journey started for you?
Oh, to me, it's 100%. It's 100% the physical exercise. Before I was not someone that had a regular routine. I was a squash player, and I would go on the court once or twice a week, and just demolish my body. And I ultimately tore my ACL, and it was right around the time that I started reading these books, and I kind of started to realize, like, oh, you're. Everyone said my body was going to start breaking down at some point in my 40s, and guess what happened? It certainly did. And but utilizing a lot of the habit science and kind of architecting decisions, and changing my identity to someone that does something physical every day, has really just revolutionized my life from that standpoint. So that's probably the thing I would say as well. Yeah.
Well, good advice coming from a doctor. So
Yeah.
thank you, Greg, for sharing your thoughts, and best wishes to you and the entire KaiNexus team.
Thanks so much, Jamie.